Thank you for joining us. The following presentation is from a webinar titled Recruiting Top Talent in 2015, originally produced on March 26, 2015. The presenters are Greg Lowe and Holly Kressler from McKonly and Asbury. Enjoy the presentation and visit us online at www.macpas.com for information about our future events and upcoming webinars.
Thanks, Tyler, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Tyler gave a brief introduction, so I won't take too long with that. But again, my name is Greg Lowe, and I serve as the COO here for McKonly and Asbury. Also a partner here, and one of the areas of the practice I'm responsible for is recruiting and placement. And I have with me today Holly, and I'll let her tell you a little bit about herself.
Thanks, Greg. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Holly Kressler, Human Resources Coordinator with McKonly and Asbury. And my role with the firm is to hire great people internally and also externally for our clients. Thank you again for joining our webinar. And back to you, Greg, with our agenda.
Yeah, just real quickly, let's talk a little bit about what we hope to get accomplished today. First of all, most of the people that are registered for this call likely already know that the stakes are pretty high in terms of hiring great people, meaning when that does not go well, it's not a very good result for the person that we've hired or for the organization. So we'll talk a little bit about that and also the cumulative effect of that. Then we'll spend some time looking at just a few characteristics of the current workforce marketplace that we see out there, some trends that we see, some implications of those trends. We'll then spend some time with recruiting trends and best practices. In other words, how are people looking and how are seekers seeking? What are we seeing in the marketplace? How do we then, once we have, however we achieve it, once we've gotten a pool of candidates, how do we sort through those candidates, including the very finalist candidates that we think are the ones that we're most likely to hire for the position, for our client, for ourselves, and many of you on this call are probably involved in recruiting or placement yourself internally, so we'll take a look at that. And then there's a brief part at the end where we'll just talk about some of the pros and cons of internal versus external recruiting. And then we'll have I think Tyler will have a couple brief announcements at the end, and then we'll have some time at the end for questions and comments. You're welcome, as Tyler mentioned, to submit those questions and comments throughout the presentation, but we'll try to reserve the end time to take care of those. So we have about a total, we're shooting to be able to answer those questions at around 2:50, something around that time frame. So I will try to keep to the clock. So let's go ahead and dive in then. The stakes are high and cumulative. You probably don't need me to review this, but a lot of people underestimate the cost of losing an employee. Nobody's perfect in recruiting. Employees have life situations that change and geography situations that change, and there's a variety of reasons that people leave. We know that, but when somebody does leave a company, we think about a couple of things. First of all, a lot of times I have to have temporary help. I have lost productivity for that person not being in that job anymore. Even if I replace them immediately, the person I replace them with cannot possibly be as productive as the person that left day one, so there's kind of ramp-up time. A lot of times I have administrative costs, COBRA for benefits, and a lot of administrative forms, et cetera, to go through, and so I have people processing those. A lot of those people that may have moved on from the organization had certain licenses or certifications that are very difficult to replace, and so I've got to add that back perhaps to the next person in that role. And particularly if they're in a sales or marketing capacity, obviously they take with them client relationships, client contacts, and a new person starting in that role obviously needs to begin again. So a lot of the there's estimates all over the board that I've seen out there, but this is a pretty wide range I'm going to give you, but most of the estimates indicate that when a person leaves a company, it costs about 100% of the employee's salary, as high as 250% in order to fully replace them at the same level of productivity. So obviously a lower level position would be closer to, or maybe even a little bit below that 100% number, but if this was a managerial position, an officer position, a sales or marketing position, it could be up to 250% and possibly more depending on that person's role. So not only are the stakes high, they're also cumulative, because now that the person's left and then I fill their role, if I don't do that well, then I've sort of doubled down, and I have all that same set of costs twice. And so the more often that happens, obviously, the worse it is for my organization that I'm representing, and the worse it is for those employees who have been put into the wrong spot maybe, or have not been a match for what the need was. So probably preaching to the choir here, but the stakes are very high, and again, they're cumulative when I have to do it multiple times. Go ahead. There's a couple just trends that are what's going on in the marketplace. There's a lot of talk that, well, gosh, the recession is over, and since the recession is over, this is just going to be a booming labor market again, et cetera. So I put a couple slides up from the Department of Labor to talk with you about. We do see this slide depicting unemployment, and we see that we've sort of recovered from the recession, and now for most recent numbers I've seen anyway are from February having about 5.5% unemployment, and that's about where it was prior to the recession. So definitely not that high 8, 9, 10 percentage range that we've been looking at before. So it's a tighter market labor-wise than it was obviously during the recession and immediately following, and it's continued to improve, may even continue to improve a little more once we get past this nasty winter that we've had, et cetera. So if you go to the next slide, Tyler, thanks. The unemployment rate, if you look at this chart, this kind of shows what's going on with the unemployment as it relates to those recessions. So you see right now we're at 5.5%, and those gray bars, you see one at 2001 and 2, another one at 2008 and almost 10. Those represent the recession. You can see what happened to unemployment spiking as high as just right at 10%. And you see we've sort of come down now back to not quite where we were prior to the last recession, but pretty close. One of the discouraging things on the next slide we'll see is that a lot of that unemployment improvement and that rate improving is really because less people are participating. And this slide sort of depicts that. Same recession bars there, same x-axis, and shows it really from in the early 90s, almost a solid trend all the way to 2014 that just less people are participating in our workforce as a country. So not all of that improvement in the unemployment number is a result of people finding work. It's also a result of people not looking anymore and sort of dropping out. Now, there's a lot of talk by a lot of different economists that some of those people are re-entering the marketplace, et cetera. But in general, you kind of see what's going on, that it's not all just rosy news from the economy producing all these jobs. It's a lot of people that have stopped looking that have contributed to improving the unemployment rate. So this next slide depicts what's happening with new people that are posting jobs looking for help. Okay, and so this little weird how the Department of Labor depicts this, but I'm going to start in the top left-hand corner of this. In January of 2004, just by way of reference, what they're saying there is that there were 2.5% more new job postings in the month of January than there was in December of 2003. And they redo that calculation over and over and over again. So you see, we sort of bottomed out prior to the recession at around 1.6%. That's that circled number, meaning in July of 2009, we only had 1.6% new postings, new listings for jobs that were published by people that were looking than the month before. In other words, almost basically flat. Not a lot of opportunity for people looking for jobs. As a result, companies were in a position where they might have 10, 20, 30 applicants for one role. You might say it would be a hirer's market at that time. And then you see, as we came out of the recession, that improved to the high water mark that it's hit so far. And I only have this through April of 2014, all the way up to about 3%. So we're now back to kind of where we were before the recession, that each month is bringing new job postings. And so that trend is now, you might say, is moving us back into an employee market, meaning that there are more jobs than there are employees seeking in some cases. So that trend has happened. Another impact of that on the next slide you'll see is that there are it's definitely taking more time to fill jobs than it ever has. In this statistic from DICE, it was published in the Wall Street Journal, just shows you now that it's taken over 4 weeks, the longest that it's ever taken in the 15 years that they track this statistic, for people to fill jobs. If you're talking about management or finance or accounting, that's as high as 9 weeks. And the larger company you are, if you're a 5,000 or 10,000 employee company, your statistics would even be higher than that, okay? Because just obviously more protocol, more approvals required, et cetera, to fill roles. It just takes even longer. So that's a little bit of a concerning trend, in that what's happening, I guess, in my opinion, is that companies are, having come through a recession, are as picky as they've ever been about getting exactly the perfect match and the best case that they can, knowing the cost of doing this poorly or doing this wrong, as we talked about earlier, the cost of that. So companies are very picky and very choosy, as they should be, to do this right. But at the same time, employees, or applicants, we'll call them, prospects for the job, they're as picky as they've ever been, because now the economy has improved. There are more and more opportunities being circulated to them, and they start to see that, well, not only does this, they're not just looking for a job, they're looking for a great match, and many of them are not willing to, of course, leave where they are unless they have a real strong possibility that it's a great match where they're going. So both sides, you might say, are screening, I think, sort of harder than they ever have before. You can imagine back in the recession, maybe the prospect side didn't quite screen as hard as they might have otherwise wanted to if they were out of work and looking for work. But now both the hiring side and the applicant or prospect side are screening harder than they ever have before. So this is making is elongating the process to have people hired. And it's basically, I think, in many ways, upping the pressure, because after you've been invested in this process to bring on a new employee, and it's 2 weeks, and then it's 3 weeks, and then it's 4 weeks, and then they're going to, if they're employed, they're going to give notice someplace. It sort of ratchets up the pressure on the process, and in some cases that pressure can lead to bad decisions as the process drags on. But that's just another stat to kind of keep in mind out there, and that's lengthening. It's not shortening, from, again, the statistics that I've seen. I threw in, just as I was looking at all this Labor Department data, I threw in one graph for those of you out there that have children. I have 4 sons, and we've had discussions about them going to college at different points. I just kind of thought this was an interesting one for your kids at the dinner table. So I throw it in there for what it's worth. Didn't cost you anything, so don't be mad at me if you don't like it. But this is the unemployment rate for 25-year-olds in our economy over a 20-plus year period. And each of those lines reflects the education level of those people looking for jobs. And those same gray bars there reflect the recessions that we've been through. It's just kind of interesting that if you were a person with a 4-year college degree, a bachelor degree or higher, there's really never been a time in our economy over a 20-year run that there was unemployment much higher than 4%. It did tap a little bit above 4% at our most recent recession and immediately following, but it's a pretty interesting statistic. And the less education that you have, you can just see that unemployment rate rising all the way to the point if a person without a high school diploma is looking for a job as high as 16%, and still almost double digits even now in this economy. So a good one to maybe put underneath your kid's dinner plate while you're having a conversation with them and ask them what that green line represents and what do they think about it. I couldn't resist throwing that one in there. So, but onward ho. Market, just kind of a summary of what we just talked about then. Well, employment levels have improved. Definitely a lesser population of participants. Competition for talent is certainly increasing with the pace of how our economy has been improving. Although if you're watching the market yesterday, some of us are wondering how much it's improving. But nonetheless, it is a more competitive marketplace for talent. I kind of call it recession memory. There's a very strong recession memory for hiring companies. They remember what it was like to lose money in a couple of years in a row during the recession, perhaps, and how difficult that was. So they're very, very cautious in hiring even now. And also employees recognize how important it is to have a long track record at one place when you hit economic difficulties, So again, both of those things are combining to make this just elongating this hiring process, both sides very finicky. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that both sides are cautious. Just a couple other stats I'll throw at you real quick before we move on. You know, the average tenure for people working in the United States right now in their job is 4.5 years. And some of you, I don't know your reaction to that. You might think, well, gosh, that's short, or that seems like a long time. I don't know what your reaction is, but I can tell you this. It's the highest level that we've seen in terms of average tenure, 4.5 years, in the last 30 years. And if you go all the way back to 83, it was only 3.5. 2002, still about the same, 3.7 years. So people are definitely, when they have found something, seem to be hunkering down, and it's going to take a very, very good opportunity to have them to consider to leave it with the recession memory being what it is. I just think that that caution is going to be here for years to come. And this next slide has a couple other scary facts. A lot of different surveys depict this in different ways, ask the question in different ways, so I'm giving you some summary data here. But about 50% of current job holders in the United States are reported through these surveys to either be actively seeking a new job or willing and open to one. Now, again, I know that it's kind of tricky how you ask that on a question. Who would answer, if you ask them, are you looking for a new and great opportunity if it came along? How many Americans would say, no, I would never consider that? But nonetheless, the statistics are about half, 50% of the country, is currently actively looking for a new job or willing to consider or being open to one. In addition, when you add in those that are unemployed, of course they're looking, so clearly you have a majority of the country that would be willing to consider a new and great opportunity. And that's a pretty high number that people that are recruiting and helping to find talent, either internally or externally recruiting, have to deal with. And then this last number, I'm just a few years younger than this statistic, but beginning in 2016, we have 30 million Americans that are working right now that are in the boomer category that begin to retire. So from 2016, a long parade of 30 million workers leaving the workforce, the majority of whose jobs will have to be filled by somebody else. So in a sense, all the last 10 minutes here of the statistics kind of points to a tight labor market, a labor market that we really haven't seen since 05, 06, 07, back in that day, when it's going to be more and more difficult for employers to find the talent they need as their businesses continue to grow, even to find the talent they need to replace some of these statistics that we see, that people that move on for other opportunities or people that just simply are now going to be retiring. But 30 million people leaving the workforce in our country is a big deal and a big number that's going to absolutely impact things. Holly, I'll turn over to Holly for a second. On this next slide, Holly's going to talk about some of the ways that people are, on the recruiting side, are seeking candidates. Go ahead, Holly.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Some of the ideas here are we do look for job search engines as Career Builder, Monster, other sources that you may use. Social media is really big now, into Facebook, LinkedIn, print media, newspaper and print ads. This way is could be a little bit more expensive and may not be used as much with certain positions. Personal network, referrals, word of mouth. I know here we get a lot of that, and it's always in a positive demeanor. Job fairs at local colleges, local high schools, different places around the community. Internships. Here internally we do externship job shadows also, and we do find great fits for your culture, position. I would say probably the top three we would see more in speed, less personable. You can get your person maybe quicker or faster, but the bottom three, I feel like they're more reliable. They're more personable. You get to know them before you actually, bring them on. Now the next slide here we have our how are seekers seeking electronically. So of Google's 1 trillion plus searches each year, over 1/4 are employment related. Over 30% of the candidates are active on LinkedIn, while over 80% are active on Facebook. Now, the difference between the candidates and the recruiters we see is over 90% of recruiters are active on LinkedIn, but only 65% are active on Facebook. Recruiters are not seeing a large pool of candidates on Facebook as they are seeing on LinkedIn. And the Aberdeen study reports that 73% of 18 to 34 years old found their last job through social media.
It's an interesting trends electronically, but clearly it looks like there's an opportunity in the recruiting space, based on some of those statistics, to increase on the Facebook side of things, perhaps. And I thought back up just one slide there for a second, Tyler. It's just interesting that only 30% of candidates, as much as we hear about LinkedIn, only 30% candidates report that they're using that in any way to try and find a new position, whereas 90% of recruiters are on LinkedIn. So clearly a little bit of a disconnect there still, even at this day and age in the job market, of the value of using something like LinkedIn. And it seems like more candidates are just more willing to be active and looking on the Facebook side, maybe more towards their personal referral network than recruiters are. So it seems like an opportunity there. Another statistic that just shocked me, that just came to my mind as we've been talking about this. It's hard for me to believe that if you talk to somebody that's gotten married in the last year, there's more than a third chance, or 35% chance, that relationship started online, and that number continues to grow every year. So obviously the digital side of what we do is going to have to continue to grow with it. But thanks, Holly, for sharing a little bit of that. There are a million, I think literally a million different surveys as to why employees leave companies. I'm only going to talk about a couple of them here, recent ones. There was a Robert Half survey that was done late last year, surveyed 2,100 CFOs and then 300 rank and file employees. You just see the difference in terms of the reasons why they left their employment. And still the same reasons that we've seen for many, many years pop up at the top of that list. I wasn't paid enough. My career path was blocked. I was unhappy with somebody that I reported to. I was working too much, or et cetera. A little bit higher particularly the top category, not enough money for people below the CFO level. And if you flip over to the next, so that's one survey, and here's just another one sort of just like it, except done by a different organization. This was off of Career Builders, a survey they did late last year, about 3,000 workers across the country and all different levels. Still, they're ranking concerns over salary and no opportunity to advance, and you can see work-life balance does appear on that one and appears sort of at the middle. A couple of similarities, but still the top ones as to why people are leaving still tend to be in the salary, responsibility, promotion, career opportunity kind of level. I only say that because you tend to hear a lot in this day and age, particularly from the younger generation of workers, that meaning and value and significance in what they're doing is the most important thing to them. Yet every time I read one of these surveys, those types of items don't tend to make the top of the list. And we'll kind of come back to that point in a second. But so we could have filled the rest of our time with just looking at these surveys, and really what matters is why people are leaving, our company, the company that we all work for, or that you work for individually. Why are those people leaving? The surveys aren't going to matter if we can ascertain through exit interviews and other dialogue with employees and have a goal of parting ways friends to the best that we possibly can to learn why those folks are leaving. That's the most important survey any of us have, as to why folks are leaving working with us. And these national ones are less helpful for them. But then one next little point on that is that one of the reasons that escapes the surveys that you never see is that a lot of this comes back to the recruiting of the individuals for those roles to start with. In other words, an employee was somehow recruited into the organization in one of those ways that Holly mentioned a second ago, that was never a match for the job to start with. And we don't have statistics. Employees don't tend to report that on surveys. Why did you leave? Well, because I wasn't the best match for the position is not a reason that comes up very often. They generally will pick another reason off the list. There's more money or whatever. Or maybe they were even asked to leave the organization. But one way or another, to me, I think that's a large percentage. It's hard to put an exact number on it, but I think a significant percentage of why people leave their current employer is because they were never a match to start with, and something broke down in the recruiting process on either side. A mistake was made on one side or another, or in some cases both, the hiring company as well as the employee, and both regretted it almost, reasonably quickly after it was done. And so that doesn't come up on the surveys. So let's talk about some ways to vet candidates a little bit, and methods, if you will. Let's just say all of us on this call are working on filling a job role, and a couple of basic questions to ask. Have we made an assessment of the culture of our organization, the culture of the team, and the culture of the manager? I mean, how well do we really know that? Do we know the best sort of person? I like to use that word, the best sort of person that's going to match with the department that they're going to be working in when they get hired. Do I have enough of a detailed job description put together that will help me help candidates decide whether or not this could be an opportunity for them? Because we're no longer in a market with a large pool of unemployed people willing to do whatever the job description says. We now have a market that's getting tighter and tighter and tighter, as we've talked about. And so we got to make very sure that we have the detail in this job description and in this profile so that the candidate can make a good and educated decision about it. Because a lot of times if we don't have it in this type of marketplace, the candidate, and quite rightly so, is going to demand it. And so let's just say we've done that. We've assessed our culture. We understand our team. We got a really good job description, a tight profile of what we're looking for. And now we've executed a successful search. We've used those means that were talked about earlier. Probably everybody on this call has 2 or 3 of their favorite ways to look for people. Not everybody can have an intern program in their job environment that they get to personally know people over a 90-day period. Other people are probably doing exclusively electronic or online, social media type methods, and everywhere in between. But we've executed a successful search, and now I have 10 candidates that have said, at least to me over the phone or via an email, hey, I'd be interested in being interviewed for this position. The last thing that we've done is, again, in this day and age, we've probably done a social media screen on that candidate. We've Googled that person. We've looked for any kind of social media or online presence that they have to just find out, again, a little bit about this person that's out there. There's a lot of HR law conversation going on in our country right now of just the caution one needs to exercise when doing that kind of thing. But again, if it's out there, if it's public information, companies have a right to look at it. Obviously, they can't have discriminatory practices based on what they find if it's something that you can't legally discriminate against, such as a disability or another one of the protected areas. But that's a relevant thing to do now, and I think probably, again, most people are doing. So I've done those things, and now I need to just choose one candidate because I've got these finalists that are evolving, and the more I talk to them and I'm going through my interview process, come to the area of assessments. We have, in fact, in the past, we've spent an entire entire webinar on assessments. Particularly, we did a deep dive into the Kolbe assessment with one of our business partners at Cornerstone. And I put the link on the slide in case anybody wants to hear more about the Kolbe assessment. But basically 3 different varieties, and this is going to be a gigantic oversimplification of the assessment world. But if I'm interested in the cognitive abilities of a person, you might say their IQ or their mastery of certain skills, like how well they can handle Excel or Word, or do they have a CPA certification in the case of our company, we put that into the cognitive area, and every company has a different flavor of cognitive assessments that they do, and some do none at all. But when there is a debate between multiple candidates, often assessments at that level are helpful. And they're not the only assessments that you have an option for. Because, in theory, you know the team or the manager or the department pretty well and the culture of your organization, you may want to do some of what I'm kind of calling emotional makeup or personality assessments. The Caliper assessment or DISC or Myers-Briggs may be helpful to help you assess and help the candidate assess whether or not their personality is going to be a fit, their emotional makeup is going to be a fit for the type of department that they're going to be working in. Most of those things, very inexpensive, can be done all online, $20, $30, $40 in most cases, and can offer some insight, particularly if you've used that assessment for your team members where this person is going to be working. So if there's time, and particularly when there are multiple candidates that are all great, on paper, and even great in the interview, this assessment is some of those assessments are great tiebreaker. The Kolbe assessment, a little different. It talks about a person's creative instincts, how they take action or how they make decisions. Another great assessment, particularly if your organization is using it to help managers self-assess and you're assessing the team. We've used in the past a lot the Gallup Strengths Finder survey. Again, doesn't take that long for somebody to do, not that expensive. If you buy the book, Strength Finder, it's got a free assessment in the back cover of the book, and it's a great way to just understand a person's strengths. Some people would even say personality traits that they operate with most frequently, with the main theory being that if I can be in a job that allows me to use my strengths, most of the time I'm going to be a higher engaged employee, and I'm going to be much more likely to stay in that job for a longer period of time. So I don't want to shortchange the assessment world, but almost everybody that we talk to, every client that we work with, has some subset of these assessments that they use in their own environment, and we try to adapt to the type of assessments that they have a comfort level with, particularly ones that they've used, again, internally themselves. We go to somebody says, well, this person's going to be using Excel a lot, and I know there's about 100 different Excel assessments you can give. Even Wunderlich has a section on the Microsoft Office suite if that's going to be a key job responsibility, et cetera. So you can go to that webinar. The tape of that one is out there. We don't probably have any more time today to do much of a deeper dive into assessments, but obviously a key component of hiring and helping people be exactly in the right match. So let's just say you found a finalist, though. In fact, you found the finalist. You think this is the person that you're going to hire. I'm going to have Holly take you through a couple of vetting procedures for that individual. Now that you've determined, wow, out of these 10, I really have this one person and they rank number one, I think I want to hire them. Go ahead, Holly, take them through a little bit of a process of vetting that one finalist.
Sure. The first part of that process could be or would be reference checks. A 360-degree reference check would be your past peer, subordinate, supervisor, and a third-party vendor. Most companies like to know how the candidate is doing as a customer in that third-party vendor. Some companies use outside vendors to conduct these reference checks, and others do them internally. So they can get the one-on-one questions that they would like to answer to those particular references. This gives intel about the candidate personally and also professionally.
Just one comment about the 360-degree reference checks. I just think that's an excellent practice. Almost every person that's looking for new employment has 3 ready references ready to hand to you. Of course, I don't know how many folks on this call have ever called one of those references and got a negative reference. It's kind of rare because obviously if I'm looking for a job, I'm going to give you 3 people that I think I have at least a good relationship with who would say nice things about me. But I like to be the one to provide the list because what were you like as a person? What was this candidate like as a person to work alongside as a peer? What was this person like to work for as a subordinate? You know, I worked for this person, and this person, this candidate that we're interviewing, this person, they were my boss. And what were they like as a supervisor? You know, what were they like as a third-party vendor, meaning maybe like a bank or an accounting firm or somebody from the outside that had to deal with this candidate we're talking about as a customer. I think by asking for those types of 4 references, it gives a better sort of, a better understanding of this person that we are talking about, and it gives a much better understanding than the 3 references that they may have handed me themselves. And I've actually had some candidates that are unable to provide that list. I don't think the list is that complicated. It's not that sophisticated. But to me, that's a red flag when a candidate can't produce one person in each of those categories. So just a little bit of maybe a personal preference, but I just wanted to mention that I think that's a better way than saying, can you send me references?
Next one would be background checks. These are completed by 80% of employers, 90% as contingent to the job offer. Credit history checks, those are completed by 45% of employers, and 90% are also the same, contingent to the job offer. And drug screens. This is an emerging trend that roughly 60% of new hires receive them during the process. I think that really depends on the position that you're looking to fill, type of environment you're in, and then also 98% of Fortune 200 companies do that. And then with background credit and drug screens, that depends, like I said, on the position, what type of business the company is running, to decide whether the screens need to be completed or not.
I think it's an interesting statistic there that about 98% of the Fortune 200 are doing drug screens now, and that percentage seems to be growing every year based on, I guess, what we're legalizing in which state at which time. That obviously is going to be a process that's going to change in the future or going to impact drug screening. But again, we obviously as a company do not do those ourselves, credit or criminal history or drug screens. We outsource that to a third party, as I'm sure most of you do as well. But again, best practice, we feel like that's a great way of using those 4 things to validate a finalist that we have now decided upon. So a couple of words just about internal and external recruiting. I put this in the form of some questions here. Do you recruit 10 to 20 positions per year in your organization? In other words, what is the volume that you are trying to fill positions? Do you have a person who's been successful matching the candidates out there to your culture, to the competencies that are required, and to the teammates that they're going to work with? And does that person that has been finding those folks for you, do they have the time and the incentive, and is that their job objective to do that in the future? And to me, if you can answer yes to those 3 questions, you ought to be doing internal recruiting, and you ought to keep doing it, because we are dealing with, on both sides of the equation, a human situation. We can't do it with perfection. We're trying to do it as with the highest probability of success that we can, and that's the first thing I talk with to companies. If you're doing enough volume of this, that you've got that type of volume, 10 or 20 positions a year or more, and you got somebody that's great at this, at matching up talent with the openings that you have, and that's their job, their main objective, I don't want to be the person that messes that up and suggests that you ought to go to external recruiting. But some of you probably on this call don't have yeses to all 3 of those questions, but to me, those are the important questions. That's if you can answer yes to those things, that's going great. Don't change a thing. Keep doing that as long as you possibly can. So another way to depict that on the next slide is just to put some factors on a little bit of a kind of a spectrum here. So if you have a high volume of this, of recruiting, obviously you're going to lean towards internal recruiting. If you've got a good volume of time, and back to the objective and sort of the focus of individuals doing that for you, again, you lean towards internal. If you've got a good experience and a good track record, in other words, your retention rate for the people that you are hiring through that process is good, is satisfactory to your company, again, you lean maybe towards internal. If you've got a good way to assess your own corporate culture, the team that these folks, these new hires are going to be working with, i.e. you've used assessments internally to know a little bit about your organization, again, you lean towards internal. And if you've got people that are doing this as their primary function and they can have good objectivity, sort of almost like third-party objectivity, again, you'd lean that way. But in each of those cases, we go back and find out there's a case to be made for external recruiting. Obviously, we do that for a lot of our clients, and that's sort of the opposite side of that spectrum. In other words, you're only hiring 3 or 4 or 2 key positions a year. then it may lend itself to using an outside recruiter in that case. You don't have the time or the focus available because the people that would normally do this, you've got involved in other projects, and you just want somebody to exclusively focus on finding you the right match. Again, external could be a solution there. Or you have a poor track record with the folks that you have hired. Your retention rate is not what you'd want it to be. And so, again, maybe another set of eyes from the outside could improve that. Again, it's kind of hard for an external recruiter to have the same corporate knowledge of culture that you would have. But this last one is kind of interesting because a lot of times when you start recruiting for a position, all kinds of resumes start coming in, including resumes from the person who works in the cube or office next door to you. My brother-in-law would be perfect for this position, et cetera, et cetera. And if you've got a third-party recruiter working for you externally, you can simply say, I'll forward that to our recruiter, and they will be a part of the process, versus having to be the one that says, no, I don't think your brother-in-law is right. And now I got to sort of pass you in the hallway every day with you remembering that I didn't think of as highly as your brother-in-law as you did for the position. So that's to me how we help decide whether there's a role for internal, external recruiting. So a couple of best practices here. Obviously, if you're going to consider using anybody for a recruiter, particularly an external recruiter, you want them to have a demonstrable track record. They've done this successfully, they have references, et cetera. They've got a broad search capability. They use all the tools that we mentioned in some of those earlier slides. They can explain to you the process by which they're going to help you find the right candidate. That's kind of, in my view, sort of table stakes. If you're going to be doing recruiting, you need to have at least those three things. But I've added some ones in red here that to me are differentiators. Whether you use McKonly and Asbury or anybody for external recruiting, these are some good questions to ask. Do they have a defined validation process? Anybody can generate a pile of resumes. But do they have a defined validation process that gives you confidence that they can find the best resumes out of that stack of 10, 20, or 100 resumes that come in? Are they willing to sort of guarantee up front or in a sense, put their skill, their money where their mouth is from a retainer perspective? A lot of recruiters will not start work until you've paid a retainer. We don't believe in that. We think we can do a good job in the recruiting space, so we do not have an upfront retainer. And meaning our fee is on success. Nobody pays us anything unless other than expenses to possibly travel a candidate. If we have to travel somebody in, nobody pays anything in advance. They pay us when we're successful. Is your recruiter willing to guarantee the candidate? Meaning they guarantee the process so that if for any reason that candidate leaves within a reasonable period of time, that they're going to guarantee that candidate and guarantee that search that you paid for. And lastly, are they doing any kind of follow-up with the candidate? In other words, once you hire the person, does that recruiter have any relationship with that candidate? And I mean not to just keep in touch with them to place them someplace else 5 years from now. I mean, are they keeping in touch with that candidate to maybe help them with CPE or just to see how things are going, see if there's anything that can be done to help? In a way, be like an early warning system if, again, we're talking about human beings on both sides here, we've made a mistake or something's not going exactly as advertised. So to me, those are some of the best practices that can be added by an external recruiting firm. There's a couple of questions that have come in, and I'm going to start putting those in order. But at this point, I think I'm going to transition over to Tyler, and then in our remaining 5 or 6 minutes here, we will come back to those questions as soon as Tyler's done. Tyler?
All right, Greg. Well, this first question has come in. I've heard that I should use credit checks and also that I shouldn't. Which is in sync with your stat that about half do and half don't?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I thought the statistic itself was pretty funny, meaning 50% roughly, I think it was 45 was the exact number, but 50% that have used, that are using or not using credit checks. Kind of what's the deal? And so there's kind of two sides of the argument. The first side is this: from the employer side, I think a lot of employers don't realize that credit checks are valid. They think, well, just is the employee handling money? Is the employee handling, has a direct sort of tie to finance? But it's actually a broader category than that. Are they in a position to approve expenses, approve expenditures in some way, or generate those expenses themselves personally? Are they handling personal identity information of customers, clients, et cetera? Because all those are valid reasons to have a credit check, because I think it's fair to want to know whether or not they could be in a situation with a tremendous amount of consumer debt or a bankruptcy in their past or something like that. They as an employer, you have a right to know that if that would compromise them again in their decision making handling finances. So that's the one side of it. And so I think most employers can tie that to more jobs in their organization than they actually think. And those are the people that are doing them. And I think it is a trend that more and more employers are doing them. Well, the other side of it, the reason why people don't do them is because they think they can somebody can come after them for discrimination, et cetera. So obviously when you're going to do a credit report, talk with your HR people as well, or your HR attorney. There's a proper way to do that, getting the employee's permission, providing them a copy of the report, et cetera, et cetera. We won't go into all the specifics of that now, but there's a right way to do it. There's actually a fair number of cases, at least I've read in the past couple of years, where when an employer did not do that and they had a person in a situation, people came after them for negligent hiring. Gosh, this person was handling my personal information or expenses for the company or something like that. They were somewhere with a tie to finance, and you didn't do a credit history check on them. Therefore, you made a negligent hire there. You should have at least done those kinds of things. So it is 50-50, roughly 50-50, and that's what we're seeing out there. But that's a decision that each organization is going to have to make. Obviously, with McKonly and Asbury, a lot of what we're doing is in and around the financial realm and handling client data, et cetera. So we do them uniformly for everyone, but your business may be a little bit different, so I have to leave that one up to you. Go ahead, Holly, with the next one.
All right, there's another question here that came in. I hear about the current young generation caring more about the meaning and significance of their work than any other factor, but they didn't make the surveys you shared as reasons people leave.
I think it's a good point, but again, perhaps a better way to think of those surveys is I have to have salary and I have to have opportunity, et cetera. Those are kind of the must-haves. At least that's how a lot of employees seem to be answering these surveys. But another way to sort of think about the meaning and the significance side of it is that those are the reasons why people stay. I saw a statistic as I was preparing for this a couple days ago that said an employee who believes that they have meaning and significance in their job is 3 times more likely to stay in that position. So I kind of view those as reasons that people stay. And I just think in general, just trying to build employee engagement, being as inspiring as we can as leaders in organizations about the mission and meaning of what we're doing, that's always a value. That's always going to be a value. But in the end, particularly in this economy, those things do not trump the core matters that keep popping up on these surveys year after year about salary, about compensation, about opportunity to advance, et cetera. Another question that has come up here is, how much does this cost? How do you price placements for clients? Good question. Depending upon the role, meaning certain roles that involve bringing candidates in from outside of the market, or certain segments of the business that the placement itself is looking for a candidate out of a very, very, very small pool, can be a little bit higher than the range that I'm going to give you, but I'm happy to answer it. Usually that range is about 15 to 20% of the annual salary, excluding bonuses and other kinds of things, just the annual salary of the candidate. So roughly that's the range that we operate in, is the 15 to 20% range, again, depending upon the candidate, how many searches or placements we may have done with them in the past, et cetera. So that answers that one. And here's a last question that Holly can chime in on a little bit as well that's come in. Hey, isn't Facebook limiting using a personal page for business, or how are recruiters looking for candidates? And one of the ways is to have a Facebook presence, obviously, as a company, as posting, hey, here's a great thing we're doing from an internship perspective, externship perspective. We're having this webinar or other things like that on the company page to just build as best you can, a following to your Facebook presence, as well as just the network that you establish from your Facebook friends that are out there kind of in the marketplace is another way. I don't know if Holly had anything to add to that, but that's one of the way, and we just see more and more candidates seem to be turning to that, and even more so than LinkedIn, which we kind of all think is, well, gosh, that's a given.
Yeah, I agree with you, Greg. I think that is completely true, and I know a lot of people share a lot of posts now, and Facebook has that opportunity. So if we're posting it on our McKonly and Asbury page, if it's a particular position, webinar, whatever such, everyone within our firm will repost that to their page. So they will have their network see it. They may have companies see it. They may have family members. Whoever would be looking for that particular position, that's how we, get a lot of people to come in as candidates, saying they saw that on our website, they saw that on our Facebook post, or even on someone that works here within our firm.
All right. Thanks, Holly. So those are the 4 questions that have come in so far. Unless you want to shoot in one last one, we'll start to turn things back over to Tyler. I will just end by saying, if there's any questions that you have about the things that we went through, I know some of them we went through pretty fast, just email Holly or myself. There's a slide coming up here in a second, I think, or one that was in part of the show that had our email address on it. Feel free to reach out to us. Happy to talk with you about it and answer any questions that we can, or go into any more detail of areas that we skimmed over pretty quickly during the presentation. Thanks very much for your attention, for joining us today, and look forward to catching you on another webinar in the future. Take care.
Thank you once again for joining us for this presentation produced by McKonly and Asbury, Certified Public Accountants. We hope you join us and participate in our upcoming events. You can stay up to date with news and learn more about our upcoming events by visiting us online at www.macpas.com. Thanks again, and have a great day.